The flow of front office. Now that you are well orientated to the front office, it is important that we look at the daily flow of front office and what the department's roles and tasks are. All of the functions and areas of the front office are geared towards supporting guest transactions and services. The flow of front office is easily seen through the guest cycle, which can be divided into 4 stages: pre-arrival, arrival, occupancy, and departure. It will be very clear after looking at the guest cycle that the way in which the front office operates is directly related to what the guest is doing. It is equally essential in order for your department to flow efficiently that your office is appropriately designed. In this lesson, we are going to look at the flow of front office through the guest cycle and the desired functional organization of front office. We will begin by looking at how the front office flows through the guest cycle. The guest cycle is the best way to see the full representation of how the front office flows. Each stage represents a logical sequence of interactions between your establishment and guest. If you are aware of what happens in each stage of the guest cycle, you will understand how business flows throughout your establishment, and this will allow you to look after your guests with the utmost care throughout their stay. The 4 stages of the guest cycle that we will cover are the pre-arrival, the arrival, occupancy, and the departure. Firstly, let us look at the pre-arrival. The pre-arrival stage is when your guests choose to stay at your establishment and their reservation is made. When the reservation record is made, the guest cycle is initiated. It's during this pre-arrival stage that you will be able to personalize your new guest's stay from the information that they gave you over the phone. An example of this would be if Mrs. Smith made a reservation with you and told you that she would love to book a relaxation massage for the Saturday morning. She also asked to have extra amenities in her bathroom throughout her stay. Another request that Mrs. Smith asked for was a table to be booked in the restaurant every evening at 7 p.m. Don't roll your eyes at all the requests that Mrs. Smith has made. That wouldn't be professional now, would it? With the automated system that you work with at your establishment, it will be easy for you to process all the requests that Mrs. Smith asked for. You'll communicate with the spa about her request for a massage on Saturday morning and set reminders, known as traces, for the housekeeping department about her requests for extra amenities. You would then use your restaurant reservation system to make restaurant bookings for every night of Mrs. Smith's stay. If you don't have an automated restaurant reservation system, you would communicate Mrs. Smith's request with your restaurant manager. The most important outcome of the pre-arrival stage is that you have a room ready for Mrs. Smith when she arrives. Going through the reservation process and organizing all the added extras for Mrs. Smith's stay and then not having a room ready for her arrival would be a disaster. The next phase we will look at is the arrival. The arrival stage of the guest cycle includes registration and the rooming functions. Your guest will arrive at your establishment, register at the front desk, and establish a legal relationship with your establishment by providing a payment card to be verified. Once the registration process is complete, you will issue Mrs. Smith with her room key, and depending on your establishment's procedures, you will either let Mrs. Smith walk herself to her room, or you or one of your colleagues will escort her to her room. Once your guest arrives at her room, the occupancy stage of the guest cycle begins. We will now look at occupancy. The occupancy part of the guest cycle is when the front office really gets to shine. You'll be fulfilling all of Mrs. Smith's requests and answering all her questions. When a guest such as Mrs. Smith makes that many requests at the time of booking, you can be guaranteed that she will ask many more questions during her stay. How wonderful for you, as you get to show off how efficient you are at looking after your guests and coordinating all of their requests. One of your main objectives that you will be striving for during the occupancy phase of the guest cycle is to encourage repeat business, and having impeccable guest relations is essential to achieve this. Security is another very important factor that needs to be attended to with the utmost seriousness during the occupancy stage of the guest cycle. The security issues that affect front office include verifying the guest's identity and other information, and protecting guest funds and valuables as well as the guests themselves. The last stage of the guest cycle that we'll look at now is the departure. During the departure phase of the guest cycle, all guest services and accounting aspects are completed. When a guest departs your establishment, they will leave their room, come to the front desk to go through and pay their account, ask any additional questions, hand in their room key, and depart the building. Your automated front office system will automatically update the room's availability status and close the account. It's during the departure stage of the guest cycle that you will also inquire with your guest if they enjoyed their stay with you and encourage them to return to your establishment. The more information that you gather from your guests during this phase of the guest cycle, the easier you will be able to anticipate their needs for their next stay. Now that you know the basics of the guest cycle, we will end this lesson by looking at the desired functional organization of front office. In order for there to be an efficient flow in the front office, it needs to be organized and functional. The design and layout of where each of your individual workstations are at the front desk needs to allow every one of you to have access to the equipment, forms, and supplies that are necessary for you to fulfill your required tasks. Imagine how awkward it would be being on the telephone with a guest who is asking for a bottle of champagne to be in their room on arrival, and you don't have the right paperwork close at hand to fill out, and this request is then forgotten. You should always have easy access to equipment, forms, and supplies that you will need to complete most requests that you will get asked over the phone or in person. For all expected and reasonable requests, you must be prepared. At no point should you have to leave your guests unattended or turn your back to your guests when you are with them at the front desk. If this does happen, your front office design needs to be re-looked at to allow for an efficient flow. Well done on completing this lesson on the flow of front office.